Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and this is all about how to plan and write serial fiction using Scrivener. Writing software Scrivener doesn't make me a better writer, but it does make it possible for me to write in a particular way. Without it, I'm pretty sure I'd have suffered one of these fates. 1. Burnout. Writing a weekly serial is hard. It requires constant production, so the risk of overloading is very real. This would be bad. Instead, I've written and published 3 back-to-back novels in serial form, and am currently in the thick of my 4th, and nobody's told me that I've gone mad, so I'm going to assume that I haven't. 2. Extreme stress. Even if I was able to keep up with the schedule, without Scrivener I'd be a blubbering mess in the corner of the room. I wouldn't enjoy the process of writing, which would inevitably result in me writing less over time. I don't believe in the necessity of the suffering artist. It's absolutely possible to create and be happy and healthy. 3. Narrative structural collapse, which sounds very dramatic. But without Scrivener, the most likely scenario would have been me getting in a complete muddle, falling into plot holes, running into writer's block, contradicting myself, losing the pacing, and so on. The stories wouldn't be as good, basically, and readers wouldn't be confident in my abilities as a storyteller. When I tell other authors I write and publish a new chapter of work every single week, and I've done so across 4 separate books and 9 years, they quite often look at me like they've just witnessed the gibberings of a madman. Often the question is simply, but how? I suspect the answer is, well, Scrivener. Important aside. This is going to be a very deep dive into my process of writing a long-form serial. You will absolutely, positively want a cup of tea for this one. Also, there's some illustrations in the newsletter form of this, which might be useful to reference, so you can find those at simonkjones.substack.com. If you haven't heard of Scrivener and are wondering what I'm on about, do hop over and check out my intro What is Scrivener post before going on any further. So Scrivener is useful for any long-form project, but it's especially well suited for anyone working on a serial, fiction or non-fiction. That's because Scrivener's feature set is heavily weighted towards structure. I'll get into the specifics in a moment. My stories tend to be lengthy with large ensemble casts. There are subplots and multiple story strands that have to be woven together. My particular publishing process is to write and publish as I go, week by week. It sounds very seat of the pants, but I've always enjoyed the process and have rarely felt stressed by it. I've also never missed publishing a week's chapter unless it was on purpose, such as taking an actual holiday. I am convinced that I wouldn't be able to write and publish like this without Scrivener. I've written about the way I plan my stories in a post called The Story Loom, which I recommend checking out if you're interested in that kind of nerdy detail. So my layered approach is to start with the basics, and then peel them away to discover the details. The entire book could be summed up in a simple sentence at the start of the process, but that's not going to help me write the thing. Ideas documents need to be translated into practical working plans that can then be magicked into actual words on the final pages. If I'm writing chapter 5, I'm also simultaneously planning chapters 6 to 10 in fine detail, as well as laying out chapters 11 to 20 in looser detail. I'll also have an eye on chapters 40 to 50 and the final ending, as well as those key milestones along the way. It's like navigating through an unfamiliar place with a map, except I'm also the person responsible for drawing the map. My approach to writing serials, especially my current one, Tales from the Triverse, often feels closer to television storytelling and production than it does to novels. One episode is in pre-production, another is in shooting, another is in post-production, and another has been sent off to the audio department or to visual effects. Juggling all of that is made immeasurably easier by using Scrivener. Step 1. Early development. The Scrivener binder is a collection of documents, but all contained within a single project. Up the top, inside the manuscript folder, is the book itself. Each of the subfolders in there represents a chunk of the book. Think of them like seasons of a TV show or parts of a novel, and inside each of those are the actual chapters, and we'll get to that momentarily. Ignoring the folders called front and back matter, we then have 3 critical sections: characters, places, and research. I don't tend to use the notes section. Most of the upfront pre-production effort goes into research. This is where all of the world building, backstory, and primary plot stuff is worked out. Characters and places are where I keep notes about those things. And into the research folder goes quite a hodgepodge of stuff. I always prioritise characters and actual story over lore, but in the case of Triverse it was important to get a lot of the lore worked out ahead of time. Triverse is primarily a detective thriller, and if the police were going to be working on cases, I had to define the parameters of the more sci-fi and fantasy elements, otherwise it wouldn't be fair on the reader. I couldn't just make it up as I went along, because that would cheat the investigations. The story lore had to be right for the procedural lore to be correct. And hence inside the lore folder in my research area, there's a whole load of stuff on each of the worlds and how they tick. Everything I might need to know or reference. In fact, each world has specific documents on areas such as technology, economy, religion, geography, culture and society, politics, and language. Those 7 aspects of the world were the bare minimum I needed to understand the places. Once I defined each of the worlds, I was ready to start figuring out the actually interesting stuff like character and theme and story. Remember, this is all happening inside a single Scrivener project. I don't have tons of Word docs floating around or separate notebooks and sticky notes all over the walls. It's all in one place and can be easily referenced. Even now, over 2 years into the serial, I can easily pop up the Fantasy World technology article to remind myself of pertinent details. In the case of the Fantasy World, technology is actually magic. It means I don't have to hold all of that information in my head, and I don't need to go hunting for it when I need it. It's always at my fingertips. Just going to have a sip of my coffee before moving along. Okay, step 2, planning and plotting. Multiple folders of indulgent world building is all well and good, Simon, I hear you say. But we're not playing D&D here, we're not editing a fan wiki. Where's the actual novel? It's okay, we're getting to that. Once the world building reached a critical point, I had enough detail to start working out what would actually happen. I still have the early documents from Triverse's development, from summer 2021. Here's one, and I quote, "Each chapter is a new case following a different officer. Characters overlap, as it's a single department. Can have fun with assumptions and reactions based on the subjective narratives of each character. Should a season cover a whole year, each case is 2 chapters. Open with a cast list with pics and sketches, 5 cases per season." End quote. The plot begins as a stream of consciousness style document. For Triverse, I split it down into various strands. So I've got documents in there called the main long arc, stuff to weave into the finale, Rebel Mages arc, AI arc, Conspiracy arc, and so on. The episodic structure of Triverse meant that I could just jot down ideas for individual episodes, separate to the main arc of the story. These episode ideas could be pulled out one by one and inserted into the story whenever made sense. This is very unique to a more anthology-structured story, and isn't how I've worked out my earlier novels. It's been a fun way to work, though, hence I still have a folder with things like Wrong World Citizens, A Murder in 3 Dimensions, The Railroad, Joint Council Corruption, Assault on SDC, The Fugitive, and so on. Lots of different ideas, some of them are just titles. The list continues, and some of the ideas will never make it into the series, which is fine, but having a surplus of individual episode ideas means I've never had to worry about running out of things to write. I can always reach into that episode ideas folder and just pluck one out. Due to the way Scrivener works, I can literally drag any one of the ideas from the research folder over to the manuscript folder, at which point it becomes part of the actual series. I can use this to insert placeholders for upcoming chapters and continue to shuffle them around to best suit the needs and pacing of the story. The binder, which is the list of documents, isn't the only way to view them in Scrivener. When wrangling a large section of story, I'll often switch over to the corkboard view. This is more like moving around post-it notes on a whiteboard. And if you look at my little post-it notes within Scrivener, you can see there's random all-caps bits. On some episodes, there's little summaries on each card. And that's me shoving a spur-of-the-moment note about the story into that chapter's overview, so that when I come to actually write the thing, I wouldn't forget. In Scrivener, a chapter has the main text, of course, but it also has a ton of meta text around the edges, such as the overview, where you can keep notes and keep things organised. The synopsis panel is where I do a lot of my thinking, actually, week to week. Sometimes it will be a single-line descriptor, like this one for the early chapter, The Koth, Part 2. And I quote, "The SDC tracked down the Koth. It is killed during a fumbled arrest attempt." End quote. That was it for that chapter. And then other times there will be a world-building element specific to that chapter that I need to work out, such as this one on the first part of the story, The Creature. And I quote, "Creature has a life cycle, rapid growth but starting very small, begins increasing threat. It is not native to the Mesa area but came from a zoo. A tear opened and the egg fell through. They are rapid growing creatures, and the poisonous atmosphere in mid-Earth London seems to accelerate it. 1 larvae, 2 lizard thing, dog-sized, 3 pony-sized, 6 legs, 4 horse-sized, 5 rhino-sized, 2 middle legs start shifting into raised positions. 6 small elephant-sized, middle legs start growing with membranes, can climb. 7 large elephant-sized, wings now operative for gliding. 8 larger than elephant-sized, can fully fly." End quote. There's not much in the way of plot detail there, because the first part of that storyline was mostly an atmospheric piece, but I needed to work out that detail about the creature ahead of time. Sometimes I'll have chunks in the notes that are discarded. Each week I'm reacting to the previous week as well as what's coming up, and in between writing sessions is often when the best ideas surface. Hence, on the chapter Immortality Part 3, I've got a whole load of ideas which are kind of bookended just with nope, because I, at some point, decided to abandon them. Some of the synopsis notes read like me having a kind of mad conversation with myself. I'm rubber-ducking the plot and character problems, and in the process of writing out fiddly aspects or plot holes or roadblocks, I usually end up figuring out a solution. Point is, Scrivener is as much project manager as it is word processor. I told you this was a long article, didn't I? Okay, step 3, doing some actual writing. Let's not get distracted. None of the stuff I've talked about so far is any good if I don't get any actual words down. A risk with something like Scrivener is that you can spend so much time faffing about organising everything that you run out of time to actually do the thing. The actual process of writing in Scrivener is, fortunately, very simple. The text of a document works like any other word processor, with the usual tools at your disposal. I tend to have my notes open on the right, and I can easily hop to other parts of the project using the binder on the left, but my focus is right in the middle of the screen. But if having all those details around the edges is still too much, you can actually switch over into a handy writing mode that strips away all other distractions. If you struggle with keeping your attention on the words, it's really useful. Something else I find useful is the document target features. You can set targets for the document that you're currently working on, as well as for individual sessions and the project as a whole. I have 1,200 words as my typical chapter length for my fiction, so I tend to set the target up when beginning a chapter. This then manifests as a little word count down the bottom and a progress bar that slowly gets filled up and changes colour over time. Also, clearly I've not kept to my 1,200 words limit on this particular article. Anyway, the bar gradually fills up until it turns green. 1,200 words is the sweet spot for me because it's relatively easy to accomplish. I also find that even if I'm not really in the mood during a session, if the words are proving a bit difficult, if I manage to get to 400 words, I'll glance down at the progress bar and go, I've made some good progress there. And then I'll find myself carrying on and actually ending up writing the whole thing. That progress bar has a lot to do with that, as it changes colour towards green. It's a little nudge of encouragement. Step 4. Post-production. Once the text is done, I move on to the editing phase. Although, to be more accurate, I'm never not in the editing phase. I edit as I write, continuously tinkering and changing sentences and word choices. This helps make the first draft relatively decent, because it's been through several passes along the way. Writing on a computer really helps my process here, as I'm able to remain very fluid in the writing. If I was writing freehand with a pen and paper, my text would be largely indecipherable, even to me. First up is a quick spell check with Scrivener's built-in system. It's basic, but spots any glaring typos. I don't personally use Grammarly or any of the other automated systems for my fiction, but if they speed up your process, by all means, go for it. Just make sure you don't let them start to homogenise your writing style into a kind of generic copy kind of feel. Pick and choose which of the features you use. A major part of my editing process since the start of 2024 is incorporated into my creation of the audio version. Reading your work out loud is a superb way to perform an editing pass, as it transposes the work into a different form, makes it far easier to spot errors and potential improvements. As I record the audio narration, I'm also editing, fixing problems and tweaking any clunky sentences. I'll pause in the recording, make the changes in the text, and then reread the improved section. Even if you're not actually publishing audio, it's a good idea to read your stuff out loud for that exact reason. The amount of editing varies depending on the chapter. Some require more extensive retooling than others, usually when there are complicated story or character beats occurring, or if the chapter's dealing with sensitive topics that require extra attention. I don't tend to redraft though. The published chapter is the first draft with several layers of enhancement, rather than an entirely rewritten new second, third or fourth draft. The final checks come when I plug it all into Substack for publishing. That's another chance to see the work in a new context and fix any last-minute issues. Step 5, and this is the final step, I promise. Step 5. Go to step 1. Remember, while I'm writing one chapter, I'm usually planning what's coming up imminently as well as needing the long-term plot. There are lots of spinning plates at all times. The key thing is that this very rarely becomes stressful. I really thoroughly enjoy the process of writing an online serial, and of writing in public in this form. In large part, this is due to my use of Scrivener. It makes a project on the scale of Triverse possible without my mind breaking. I feel secure in the storytelling because I can see it all laid out before me clearly. Now, of course, you don't have to use Scrivener. That's not the point of this article. You may well be doing all of this using other tools, digital or otherwise. It's always worth reiterating that it doesn't matter what you use as long as it works for you. Writing a serial and remaining a happy writer is often about getting the process right. Writer's block isn't always to do with the writing itself, but all the complications around the edges in your life. Scrivener, for me, clears away all of those obstructions. It takes care of the technical difficulties of writing fiction so that I can focus on the creative challenges. Okay, thank you for listening to this very long episode. I hope that was in some way useful. And yeah, you can find a lot more and leave comments over on the newsletter at simonkjones.substack.com.